In this video, we'll set up Ldap integration between our Active Directory domain and our FortiGate firewall. So this is necessary if you want to filter based on a user's identity using their Active Directory credentials. Now, before we get into the details for how that works, we will add our Active Directory domain controller to our firewall. Here is our Active Directory server that is running as a domain controller on a Windows 2008 server. So in our case, our domain is routehub or routehub.local, and under that domain is a container that we created called RH-users that contains all of our Active Directory user accounts. We also created 3 groups under this container, one for staff, one for management, and another for contractors. Now, most of our testing that we'll be using will be based on the Active Directory account for staff 1, which is a member of the staff group. My account, Tamati, I am also a member of the staff group. The user account for Duncan Rockwell, he is a member of the management group, and the user Amy Lynn is a member of the contractors group. Under the user folder, we will have our admin accounts and our security groups, and the admin account is what we will use for authenticating Ldap with our firewall to this domain controller. So most of this information is what we will need to include on the firewall. To add our Active Directory or Ldap server to be used with user identity filtering, we'll go to User and Device. Then let's go to Authentication and then to Ldap servers. And here we will add a new Ldap server. Here we will first configure a descriptive name for this new Ldap server profile. Next, we'll enter the IP address of our Active Directory domain controller, which exists in our server farm network. Next, we will use the default Ldap port, which is 389. For the common name identifier, this indicates the username format. So for Active Directory, that would be the SAM account name, and this would be the typical username that a user would use for logging into their computer on the domain. For the bind type, we will select regular. Okay. For the DN or the distinguished name, we will specify where we want to search and use for user accounts and groups within our domain. We will enter the Ldap string for our entire domain, okay, which is routehub.local. And last, for the user DN, we would enter our administrator account that is located in our domain, routehub.local. And of course, we'll enter the valid password for that account. Okay, when we are done, let's test our settings to make sure that everything works and that we are able to connect with our Active Directory server using Ldap, and the connection worked. It shows successful. So with that the case, let's go ahead and save our changes. Next, we will create some user groups that will map to some of our Active Directory groups that we showed you before. So these groups that we're going to be creating, they're going to be used in our policies when we configure filtering based on a user's identity. So to add groups, you need to go to User Groups. Okay, and here we're going to add 3 groups. The first is going to include all of our user groups that exist in our Active Directory domain, the staff, the contractors, and the management group. To do that, we will create a new group. We will define a name for this group. Okay, for the type, it must be firewall, which is important, and of course it is selected by default. Under remote groups, we're going to click on add. And here you want to make sure that the Ldap profile is selected that we created earlier. Now we're going to remove any because we want to manually specify what groups you want to add under this particular group. And within our Active Directory domain, let's click here. Oops. Let's go ahead and extend this out. And then let's go under our container for RH users, which contains those groups. We're going to select the staff group that's going to be included. And let's go ahead and let's add the contractors group. Extend this out. in this container, and let's select contractors. And finally, let's add the management group. Okay, and when we're done, let's go ahead and add this group. The second group will be for our staff group only. So let's do create new. Let's enter a name. The type will be Firewall, and we're going to select our staff Active Directory group. Okay, and let's go ahead and add this group. And finally, let's add a group for our contractors. Okay, and let's then specify the remote group, which is our Active Directory group for contractors. And OK to add. So now we're finished with all of our configuration for integrating Ldap between our Active Directory domain and our Fortinet firewall to allow us to filter based on a user's identity, which we'll do in the next set of videos.